He's an expert in all the aspects related with ICT in the schools and teachers training. He was the director of the programs for the integration of ICT in schools of primary, secondary, and vocational education of the Catalonian government from 1994 to 2005. He was also a researcher of ICT in education at the Counseling of the Evaluation and Education Systems from 2005 to this year. And currently he is the president of the Education Council of Catalonia. He has many books. One of the last has a essay prize. It's called The New Education, La Nueva Educación. It's an essay of learning and education in the knowledge society. And he has published also quite a number of interesting articles and books about the use of ICT in the school. So I don't want to extend more. Yes, you can start.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Yeah. Yes. I want to thank the director of the UNESCO Chair in E-Learning of the OSCE for inviting me to come here to address you today. And I'm going to present you some points about my views of K-12 education, mainly in Western countries, speaking globally, and of the activity, and try to talk about the activity of teachers and trainers and teacher trainers. Obviously, I'm not here to speak in the name of the Department of Education nor of the council I preside. I'm not going to talk about technology. I assume that technology is behind everything, so the technology aspect will be missed in my speech. Just probably many of you will remember the final scene of the movie Casablanca. This is the previous to the final, and the previous scene, the Rick, the American hero, has shot the Colonel Strasser of the Third Reich, who tried to prevent the Lisbon plane to leave with the French resistant heroes of the movie. So Colonel Strasser lies dead here, and then the police comes. And the chief of police, the Captain Renault, addresses his men and says something obvious. Major Strasser has been shot. And then he says, round up the usual suspects. So it is clear that there are some usual suspects that maybe we can guess who they are, but probably the policemen have a clear instruction on what to do. They know the usual suspects will be people probably with face of being guilty, or people that cannot show easily that they are innocent, or something like that. Well, in a time in which in many countries seems that education is not working as it should, that something is wrong in education, for some there are clearly usual suspects of the ills of education and its problems, and they are obviously the teachers. So I'm going to address this synonymous, the problems of the teachers, facing the teachers, which are general problems of education and problems of our societies. Usually teachers are suspects of something like this. For instance, a student failure, low employability of youth, and poor cultural level, and even lack of entrepreneurial skills and attitudes. They are also guilty, or Pierre is guilty before the public media, of the countries getting poor results in comparative international studies, read PISA. Teachers do not perform very well, so your country is not at the top, so this is a problem. Teachers are also blamed by things like in civic or violent behavior of some youth. If you read the British press in the riots of last August, you see that some press, for some press, the teachers were really guilty of not doing the right job in education. Also, teachers are blamed by the feeble success of reform and innovation policies that do not produce the expected results. Policies that are not formulated according with them, and they are expected to comply with such policies, and such policies do not go well, so they have to be blamed for that reason. So, and also they are many times accused of letting students down, not working hard enough, in order to prevent the failure, and trying, above all, to meet their own conveniences, their timetable, their pay, their holidays, social benefits, and so on. The issue is, are really teachers the culprits of all of this? In societies in which are drawn into suspicion and distrust, many say that the recipe for this is training teachers more and asking more of them, but nothing more than that. So I think it's time, for me it's time at this moment, to pinpoint some hard facts about education. And I say hard facts because I want to mean really important things that are happening in this general Western system of which I am talking about. I will use a gallery of people that for me has been important in my development, and I start with Andrew Mintzberg. Mintzberg is a professor of management studies at the McGill University in Montreal, the English-speaking university there. And for me, he is a true genius because in his seminal book, The Structuring of Organizations, written in 1979, when he was just 40, he was able to set up a comprehensive theory of human organizations, including educational organizations. I remember with great pleasure the experience of reading this book 20 years ago, which was really illuminating about the nature of the educational organizations. For Mintzberg, the education is organized as a professional bureaucracy. Following Max Weber's definition of bureaucracy, Mintzberg coined the term professional bureaucracy for organizations whose aim is to ensure that the performance of a certain activity by professionals that function the following way. First, they function according to a strict set of rules and regulations. This obviously affects education as it is now. Secondly, these professionals follow a strict division of labor based on a specialized knowledge. The second point here. Third, develop a standardized activity which is based on the formalization of their behavior. They behave more or less the same. So it is expected that they will have the same behavior along the job, when doing the job. They also have, some degree of professional autonomy. That means that they deal directly with their clients, the students in that case, and make their own decisions about their own actions in and administer their knowledge in an autonomous way. Also, they work in a setting which is characterized by an almost flat authority structure. Why in a school we can have one director and 50 teachers, or even 100 teachers in a big secondary school? Because it is not expected that the director will say to everybody what he or she has to do. They know, they have a knowledge which is formalized. So the vertical layers of authority are very, very low, very short. And finally, they have a formal access to the profession to perform. They need to have formal qualifications, usually conferred by higher education. This is a common setting for all, as far as I know, educational systems. And this is a setting that it is meant to provide a very important thing, the stability that is needed for a service which is of great demand. You need a thing very stable, and this makes this stability possible. So it is clear that in a profession so driven by these ideas, innovation must be really difficult, because innovation means change. So, according to Mintzberg, again, the PB, the professional bureaucracy, is an inflexible structure well suited to producing its standard outputs, let's say lectures, let's say exams, let's say grading students, let's say timetables, let's say things like that. But it is very ill suited to departing to that norm, that is to go in the direction of the production of new outputs. So this is a portrait of the difficulties facing innovation in organizations. But it happens that everywhere Major innovation depends on cooperation. So if there is any reluctance of the professionals to work cooperatively, this translates into problems of innovation. In order to innovate, everybody must agree on change, not just a few managers or professional representatives. Everybody must agree on change in this type of organization. So this affects directly all of us. As Mimber said very clearly, change comes slowly and painfully, or doesn't come at all. There's the other alternative possible. So we tend, in our talks about changing education by technology and many other things, to try to avoid this, to overlook these very hard facts. But this really impinges on the education as it is working in most countries today. So let's go back to the past, to 100 years ago. This gentleman, Charles William Eliot, was the Harvard president for 40 years, from 1869 to 1909. He was a progressive man who believed in merit, so he wanted to get rid of all those lazy young men from rich families that went to the university as a class privilege. So he was really an important agent in founding the College Entrance Examination Board in order to get rid of these people. Let's put strict norms in order, based on merit, in order to access to the university. So obviously he was very interested in secondary education. It was providing the people who went to the university. At the request of the US government, he set up a committee, the Committee of 10, that met in 1893, and they decided that the right structure of secondary education for American schools would be that one. Does it ring a bell? This is the structure they decide, and I think in other countries we can find similar processes. This is very well documented. So now we have a structure of secondary education which is based on decisions made 125 years ago. So, and this is, nobody seems to discuss the suitability of that. Maybe it's not necessary to discuss it, but let's put this question behind you, in front of you. The idea is very clear. The secondary education proposed by the Eliot Committee was mainly meant as preparation for college or university. It was intended to ease the task of the university teachers when selecting students. So now we are in a situation in which the logic of the study plans is based in very old-time conveniences of university teachers, and this has very troubling consequences, as many people said, and in particular I like to point out Peter Senge. Peter Senge is a major figure in organizational development. Since in the 1990s he wrote his book, The Fifth Discipline, where he developed the notion of learning organization. He considers organizations as dynamical systems in a state of continuous adaptation and improvement. In another book, the book Schools That Learn, he states the following: "It is a tragedy for us, for most of us, that the school is not a place for deepening our sense of who we are and what we are committed to." In other words, students as individuals are not the key focus of schooling. So students are very fond of teachers who overcome this issue and deal directly with them. This is very important for students when they know that in an organization which look more at their own conveniences than the students, and they find teachers that are really interested in the person, they respond always positively. This is also a very hard fact, which impinges on our education and the possibilities of changing as it is. So, Senge goes a little bit beyond that and says that fragmented academic subjects transform us in master reductionists. This is also a very strong statement, because it defines how education is working in many countries, and most of the countries, I would say. So it is important to think, to ask ourselves if teacher training, it does reinforce this trend, or it tries to change it. My opinion is that generally it does. It is very comfortable. It is very comfortable, teacher training, very comfortable with this type of approach. And this causes a lot of problems. Let's for another hard fact in my special list. This man is very famous. Andreas Schleicher is the head of education of the Indicators and Analysis Division of the OECD's Directorate for Education. The world famous Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, is under his responsibility. In a Lisbon Council document, he states that education is a knowledge industry in the sense that education is concerned with the transmission of knowledge. But, and the but is very important, at the same time, education is far from being a knowledge industry in the sense that it does not allow itself to be transformed by a knowledge concerning its own practices. This is a real fact that characterizes education. Where we do not have the real means to get new knowledge, the knowledge that is put before us by research, and translate into new type of organization, into new ways of practicing the profession. This is very important. And that means that teachers generally do not use new knowledge to adopt substantially new practices. In words of changes, schools are mostly not learning organizations. And the main reason for this is that teachers are trapped in the professional bureaucracy, so they cannot individually overcome the setting in which they are stuck. Nevertheless, everywhere, people are asking for better schools, maybe with no clear idea how to improve education, or not even how to define improvement of education. Most often, teachers and educational elites do not articulate clear and coherent views in a convincing fashion of what education could be, with the result that others are taking their place in shaping the future of education. And now, here I have an example of these others. McKinsey & Company is a global management consulting firm which serves as advisor to many businesses, governments, and institutions. McKinsey provides a significant example of how business organizations are entering the education field and making their way through politicians, through education leaders, and even public opinion, and even among teachers themselves. A good example is this report, how the world's best performing school systems come out on top. I do not have time to comment this report, of course, but just let's keep this slide. Title concepts come out on top. This suggests that there is or there should be a sort of competitive race between school systems, between national school systems, that is won by some systems, let's say Korea, let's say Finland and others, while others lag behind. The idea is that the countries should compete to be on top of what? On top of an agenda set by others, not by themselves. Because the agenda is set by others, not by themselves. This is important. Let's compete by the agenda which comes to us, and we accept it more or less critically. Second idea, best performing. Well, that goes directly to the idea that educational performance is a number or a set of numbers which are measurable and comparable, like the stock market quotes, for instance. PISA provides this number. It's the main agent to provide numbers. And although this report says very sensible, important things, in overall it implies that top decision makers will decide what is best for their education systems as if education systems were just a big corporation. And for that they need data, and data are provided by systems of measurement. So measurement is the key concept here, and this report says explicitly that all the top performing systems recognize that they cannot improve what they do not measure. So let's measure, and measure becomes very critical. Let's talk about measure. This gentleman was, Mr. Page, was superintendent of the Houston Independent School District from 1994 to 2001. Student test scores rose a lot under his leadership. It was called the Houston Miracle. The students get better and better and better, and that was the Houston Miracle. This man impressed greatly President George W. Bush, and so he served from 2001 to 2005 as United States Secretary of Education. The landmark No Child Left Behind Education law was passed by the Congress during his mandate, and that law set a new accountability standards nationwide. he was so happy with his work that he said, in a 2004 speech, all across America, test scores are rising. This is the important thing. Test scores are rising. Students are learning. It is mechanically assimilated to the rising of the test scores. Achievement gap is closing. Teachers and principals are beaming with pride, but not rightly so. The reality is that the much touted Houston miracle accomplished under Page was at least partially due to deliberate fraud. The dropout rates were falsified. Slow learners were often labeled as special needs in order to get them apart from the examinations. And finally, Houston teachers admitted that receiving cash in order to raise the scores. So not bad for a systematic increase of student learning, as was measured as still is being measured, I think. The issue here is that under this type of thinking, standards and standardized tests are the dominant force in American education, and I'm afraid this is widespreading quite quickly. Mr. Page contributed decisively to implement target setting as a management technique. And target setting is a form of central control, of central regulation, because sets targets that schools must accomplish. And even local authorities are in this chain because they have to rely to convey to the schools the levels of the standards that they have to attain. So everybody is tangled in the system. Autonomy is only for doing what you are told to do, and you are told to do to raise the scores. This is simply as that. By the way, this gentleman once said that the National Education Association in the US, the largest US teachers union, was a terrorist organization. Let's follow that path a little bit more. Let me introduce Mr. Dan DiMaggio. Although he is not a teacher, he clearly is a usual suspect because he is an independent writer, he's a temporary worker, and he's also a member of the Socialist Alternative in Minneapolis. Well, he's a usual suspect, clearly. The issue here is that the tests that are conducted in order to measure the attainment or the level of attainment of students are done mainly by external companies. So commercial firms bid to state contracts in order to implement and mark the tests that are mandated by the states according to that norm. This leads to a system of sweatshops in which minimally trained temporary scorers under temporary managers, usually alien to education, mark a student's test according to rubrics that are kept secret. The corruption in the whole system. An state investigation report showed rampant systematic cheating on test scores on the public schools of Atlanta. And this ended 2 years of skepticism about the rising scores of the students. The governor of the state who intervened in that said that at least 44 schools and almost 200 teachers and principals were involved in that. And that a conspiracy of silence, intimidation, a culture of fear, intimidation and retaliation, and a conspiracy of silence was existed in that school system. Results were manipulated during the marking process. When the results of the students were dangerously low, they were told to hire the population without going back. So from one moment, students get higher marks because we needed to raise in order to confront some ideal resource that will show that the results of our educational system are going to improve, the local system are going to improve. So this is not, you can find many references to cheating in Philadelphia, in many other places. So it should have been easy to foretell that this was going to happen. According to the Campbell's law, explicit in 1976, the more significant, the more any quantitative social indicator is used for social decision making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures, the indicator, and also it will serve the more to corrupt the same processes. So we're corrupting the educational process of the students because we rely on this way of of accountability of the teacher's task, based only on the test scores. Campbell's law points at the basic flaw in attempting to reward education professionals on the basis of their performance, as long as it's measured by student test scores. When test scores become the goal of teaching process, they both lose their values indicators and also distort the educational processes in very undesirable ways. So, just to summarize these hard facts, up to now we have talked about that there is a climate of suspicion and lack of confidence, of trust in which teachers have to work in many places. Secondly, the education system is organized as a professional bureaucracy, which is grounded on all traditions, static knowledge, and managerial competencies, and not on the interests of the students. And it is very ill-suited to innovation. Third, hard fact, we are working, like it or not, in a 19th century curriculum with some amendments and things like that, but nothing revamped to the time, according to the times we are now. Then, let's remember Senji. Schools show feeble commitment to individuals. And remember Schleicher. They are not real acknowledged organizations because they cannot use the knowledge they have in order to improve themselves. And finally, and this is very decisive, large-scale assessment accountability are seriously flawed, as are they defined today. So let me ask, when we do teacher training, are we taking into account such issues, or we ignore this and we just do teacher training for the system as usual? I think teacher trainers here have great responsibility in dealing with the broader picture in order to orient their professional work. So now, after this hard facts, let's now try to widen horizons. Well, sorry. The teacher training is this idea is here, to widen horizons. And I'd like to try the horizon, not to talking specifically about education, but about talking about the wider world and seeing education as a part of the wider world. So, one, Mr. Strategist. Mr. Kenichi Omae is known as Mr. Strategist. Is a Japanese that was a senior partner in McKinsey and has written a number of books, according to his website, 190. So it's a very productive man. And I have read only one, which is the Mind of the Strategy, in which I was attracted for this single sentence. I think we have to, it's easy to remember. A business reflects its manager. The business reflects the views, the values, the preparation, the quality, the goals, the aspirations of the managers, not as of the workforce. The educational system as a whole is like an army, if I'm allowed to say that, in which we have the teachers, we are the suspects, which are of not combating very well, which are on the front, but this army is deployed on the field and is given objectives, is given tools, and is given institutional settings and working methods. So what about all the rest of the elements of this army? The ones who decide how the tasks are going to be performed, the tasks that the people have to do in the front line. This is a real idea. So I think that I think it is no longer valid saying the teachers are the usual suspects. Let's say that teachers and managers and decision makers as well are the usual suspects. They are both the two sides of the same coin and cannot be dealt with separately. And although usually it seems that it is very nice to blame teachers, and the others became in the midst and have and maintain a guilty silence. Let me say it another way. The quality of an educational system cannot exceed the quality of its managers and decision makers. I think this is a very important issue. This is the point of view of the strategies and the managerial point of view. Now I'm going to this most interesting lady, most original thinker, that reached the highest academic ranks at the Harvard University and Harvard Business School, where she was one of the first tenured women. So Shoshana Zuboff, she denounced the sexism in Harvard's faculty and how difficult for a woman was to climb the academic ladder in an elitist all boys environment. Maybe it could be worth to remember now that Mr. Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard University, as recently as 2005, had to resign because he said, literally, that the underrepresentation of women in science and engineering could be due to a different availability of aptitude at the high end. So last 6 years ago, this was the point of view of very prominent men in this most prominent educational institution. Well, the interesting thing is that Susanna, after being at the top, resigned and began in the 90s a decade-long intellectual journey from which she concludes that business models based on 20th century managerial capitalism have reached the limits of their adaptive range. Well, the same business models that once were the engines of wealth creation now have turned into its impediments. Now, just change business models for educational models. And managerial capitalism is substituted by the usual way of administrative way of management in education. The idea is clear. What happens in education is part of what is happening in the wider world. We are experiencing that the limits of the usual way of doing things have reached the limits of their adaptability. Following Susanna, she has a very interesting book that is the support economy, written in 2002 or 2003. She proclaims that the logic of wealth creation worked with the perspective of the organization, the values of the core organization. But now we have to change, and now we have to change and see that the organizations have to cope with the needs of the individuals. We need a new logic based on the needs of the individuals. So I mean that organizations have to work about beginning with different principles, like who are you, what do you need, how can we help? After the decease of Steve Jobs, we haven't paid homage to him, and say that he was personally a person who capsized the music industry because he thought music in the terms of the logic of the individual and consumer, not on the logic of the industry that hold the music publishing, distribution, and so on. So we have to identify the assets we are valuable for each individual and start constructing organizations from this logic, from this point of view of the end user. This has been the point of view as a person who has a broader view of organizations in our world. Let's follow a little bit more in this line. Honora Sylvia O'Neill, Baroness O'Neill of Mengarve, is a member of the House of Lords. Is a philosopher and has written widely on political philosophy and ethics, and she has touched the things like suspicion and distrust in our societies. In a Wraith lecture given in 2002, she denounced that the new culture of accountability makes professionals and institutions more accountable only in theory. But he said that we are in an admirable rhetoric of accountability, of improvement and rising standards, and efficiency gains and best practice, and respect for patients, pupils, and employees, and so on. But we have to recognize that the real focus, after all this chat, is that performance indication, we saw it clearly in the American case of the test scoring, are chosen for ease of measurement and control, rather than that because they measure accurately what the quality of performance is. So, being evident that the performance indicators impinge directly on the job of everyone, of every person, it is clear that we need intelligent accountability, one which is based in good governance and less in fewer fantasies of total control. So that means, in other terms, that good governance can only be based on trust, not on suspicion. Let me put another, I'm quite finishing. Let me put another perspective here, and is the perspective of the social activist. Hilary Cottam is a very refreshing thinker and social activist, that she proclaimed years ago that two things that nowadays are very clear. One, that our spending regime cannot continue. It's obvious, no more to comment on that. And second, that we have weakened political systems that are well-equipped in order to have the open, honest, and far-sighted debates we need. The Muy Dignados movement is a clear demonstration of that. So this lady said the two things that are now happening very, very clearly. So Secotans' message is that we have to take the matters in their own hands. People have to react. We cannot expect that everybody will do something someday. So in every level of the society, let's be care of the elders or improving education, we have to take things in our hands. We need to stop patching and mending institutions designed for another era. Does not make sense to revamp the steam machine, the steam engine. Revamping and trying to increment its productivity is useless nowadays. So we have to forget this patching and mending mentality. And secondly, that what matters is not just ideas, but real change on the ground in our communities. So maybe from the point of view of teacher training, from the point of view of innovation and education, we could try to promote real change on the ground, dispersed, varied, not easily exchangeable, but real change on the ground that could show the ways in order to advance. This approach is certainly a big issue for teacher training and development. Change must be visible on the real ground, and if we do not do that, we are not really advancing. So, what is needed for real change? What are the basic ingredients for real change? Manuel Castells is a top-level sociologist and communication scholar, especially involved in the research concerning the information society. In the sense, we are now in his home, so it would be foolish for me to try to summarize his work here. So, the distinguished scientific work of Mr. Castells. Well, again, what are the most basic ingredients of change? In a newspaper published in Barcelona last year, he wrote, "We could think of new forms of relationship between economy and society. These are our most serious shortages." There is a lack of imagination, knowledge, and audacity. Let's experiment. Anyway, there is nothing to lose. The idea is that we do not experiment, we are going behind, we are going backwards. Now it's time of taking the spirit of the social activists. It is time also of taking grasp all the knowledge we have about our organizations, about the role of teachers, about the role of managers and so on, and try to make clear steps. But for this, we have to break some barriers, and the barriers are the barriers of imagination, knowledge, and audacity. And in order to experiment, we need to set up extensive R&D educational projects. I do not say only research, I say research and development. When I development, I mean that we have to devise things that work, that make change on the ground, real change on the ground, new ways of learning, teaching, personalizing, participating, assessing, organizing, funding. We have to experiment that. In a settings in which change is visible and change is happening, not just in theory, in which we write a nice paper and we spread good ideas. No, we need now a multiplication of initiatives in order to create new knowledge and to bring change on the ground. Otherwise, we are lost. For me, it's very clear. So, let me summarize all this in just 3 slides. Challenge. I selected 3 broad statements, which can have many lectures, many readings. And one of them, first, is that teachers should be aware that I requested, and they should be good or excellent in a system that's outdated. This is a fundamental contradiction, but you have to know it. You cannot resign of your job. So you have to perform well in a system that doesn't accompany you at all. So, first, they must be highly committed in spite of the conditions that preclude excellence. Secondly, managers and decision makers should make deep change possible. They cannot administrate things as usual. If teachers are committed to change and to working as well as, this has to be hand in hand with managers and decision makers. Teachers alone can solve nothing. at a larger scale, at least of a school, for instance. You have to real partnership. The manager cannot say, this is my job and your job is this one, so let's separate them. No, the real change means working together and making things possible. In any company, managers should provide the vision and should provide the means for changing. Exactly the same in education. Third, we have to confront the myth of extraordinary teacher that now is coming everywhere. No? Have you seen the film Waiting for Superman, in which you have the pupils that are let down by the teachers are saved by the extraordinary commitment of teachers who happen to be in private or schools or in charter schools. These extraordinary teachers, which are very committed, are not in the normal educational system and others areas. And areas in which are much more prone to business than the traditional public schooling. Second category of challenges, teachers should widen the scope of their professional mission regarding students. Remember Senji saying that a school should be a place for deepening our sense of who we are and what we are committed to. Because exactly that has to be, let's say, the motto of the modern teacher today. Educators should be not just teachers, but educators, centering on youth development and community development and sense of purpose, not just in subject matter instruction. I do not deny the importance of subject matter instruction, but it's necessary to go beyond and integrate it in a much broader perspectives. Second, we have to emphasize the preparation for the future, not for the past. We have to overcome the reductionist division of our knowledge, which is a division made more than a century ago. The CDU, the classical, the decimal division of knowledge. This is more almost that existed in the 19th century. Now we have the globalization and the appearance of the knowledge society have brought many changes. So we have to orient the students more of the future and to reflect them, to make them reflect more about the future. And in this widening of the professional mission, we have to engage in massive R&D. We cannot do it as another law, as another seminar, as another event, another public relations campaign. No, we have to make R&D possible in every school. Third challenge, the broad challenge, this is the last one. Teachers should fight for intelligent accountability. Teachers should reject narrow definitions of accountability and contribute to broader and productive ones. I think that there are schools which are very happy with the narrow definitions of accountability because they perform well, and they try to show that they perform well according to that system. So, well, teachers should say that this is not the whole picture, and the whole picture has to be much wider than that. Teachers should explain to parents and to societies that numbers lie. We have to combat the illusion that numbers never lie. For instance, you heard that Korea and Finland are on top of PISA. Well, they have grossly the same scores or same rankings and positions. In an article of the Time magazine of the last week, dated October 3rd, it said, "Teacher, leave those kids alone." It refers a mild crackdown of the Korean government on private tutoring academies that make them close at 10 p.m. because students are usually working until 12 or 11 or 12 in the night. They go to school in the morning, and then after schooling, after 8 or so, and then are brought by their parents to private tutoring academies, and they are being lectured during hours and hours. So, well, the numbers lie. The numbers of PISA and of Korea can be similar, but if we talk quality of life, we talk another concepts that I cannot enter now on them. Obviously, there is not the same system. So we have to reject the illusion of numbers, which is so easily manipulated. Secondly, we have to engage collectively on improving base assessments and improving these competency assessments as much as possible. And third, we have to put forward proposals for comprehensive and equilibrated accountability of their own work. Teachers who probably would reject the accountability based only on tests, on students' scores, but they should propose ways of giving account to society of their job. And they should be very active. They should not be shy in this. And this is an aspect in which teacher trainers could have a lot of, they have a lot of responsibility in providing an environment in which such issues are dealt with. So, after those quickly and ill-articulated thoughts, you may call me an utopian, and I gladly accept it. The spirit of what I have said may be summarized in a wonderful quote of this lady, Gloria Steinem, the American feminist who brought racial issues into the women's liberation thinking. And she once wrote that, once said that dreaming, after all, is a form of planning. We have to dream that change is possible. Let me just add that it is our obligation to dream. Thank you.